ninja in flannel, or rather ninja in camo, I guess, today. But we'll get to that later. What we've got is the Stribog SP45A3. Global Ordnance sent this out to us to review and show you guys, so full disclosure there. What we did was we actually left this completely bone dry, and we took it out to the range and just put a couple hundred rounds through it to see how it would go. And this is kind of a first impressions and initial range trip review. So here we go. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! So the Stribog SP45A3, those are the first couple shots we've done, and this thing's running like a champ. Woo. I will say, we're rocking the Lingo lower right from factory. We'll go back and test the factory one, but this thing is sweet so far. Not too shabby. So do 5 rounds suppressed for this guy, just to see the difference with 45 being subs. Mother of pearl, we are unsuppressed, so we're putting ears back on. I've done that before. Now that was fun. That was real fun. Not bad. So as you can see, the range actually went decently well. Now, like we mentioned before, we didn't oil it or anything, we wanted to see what would happen. And then we just set it up. And what we did to set up, we actually used the Dai Frico Kung Fu grip, which is fantastic. We're using the Aimwin red dots, which are really cool. They only make 2 RMR footprint in RMSC, which is the way things should be. We're using the KDG side lock mount, which is kind of sweet. It just kind of push the button, it comes off, snaps on. The flashlight mount is about the same. Squeeze your tabs, pull it off, snaps back on. It makes setup really easy. KDG sent out their charge handle, which is what all Stribog should have. Then we're using the Silencer Co. Osprey 4.5K suppressor, which I absolutely hate. So there's that. That's our basic setup. We also swapped out later on to the Lingle Industries lower, which is worth noting. We'll get to more on that a little bit later. Keep in mind also that the Skur Tactical cheek rest for the Stribog goes right on these rails, is the single best upgrade you could ever add to this brace. Everything else you see in this build will also be in the description as well if you're interested in checking those things out. So before we talk about how this performed at the range, I want to talk a little bit of just the base overview. So your Stribog here is going to be very similar to the 9mm versions, which I love very much. What you're going to have that's a little different is that your factory lowers now take AR triggers, which is really nice. They still don't take AR grips, which I wish they would do, but that's actually pretty nice. Now, one problem I do have with them is that their bolt release is terrible. So what happens is it's very small and slim. So when you go to hit it with your palm, if you don't hit it on that meat there, it will not drop. You can hit it as hard as you can. If you're on the soft port here, it will not drop your bolt. When you do finally hit it here, then it's kind of sharp and jabs you in the hand. So not a huge fan of that. The solution to that is that you can get a Lingle Industries aftermarket enhanced bolt release, which is really, really nice. It's just a paddle, how it should have been to begin with. The only downside is that when you use your PTW brace, it will not collapse all the way because it hits it. So using this brace, that could be a problem. You could bubba and buzz that off in the future to fix it, which I might do, we'll see. But that's something to think about. The rest of the lower going over it is you have a paddle release down here, which is not bad. It's a little shorter than I would have hoped, but it works fine. If you train into it, you kind of like glide your hand across your trigger guard and you'll always find it. It also has these releases here, which I actually can't even do. Holding this, you can't do it. They are so stiff. Now, using it, oiling it, it might loosen up over time, but it just drives a wedge to activate these paddles, so it doesn't give you the best leverage. So in the Lingle one, they actually deleted that completely. They made a bigger paddle down here, so it's easier to get. They turned this mag release into a bolt release, which is actually probably the best move. The Lingle lower also takes AR triggers, so I have a Geisley in there, AR safeties, grips like we talked about before, and They're just really nice. So lingo, and it's aluminum. So that's a big improvement as well. Lingo lowers for the 45 are pretty much essential in my opinion. Another aspect of the lingo lower is that the Global Ordnance mags, the Grand Power mags work just fine, and the Global Ordnance mags work just fine, the new American-made ones. In the factory lower, the Grand Power ones work great. The Global Ordnance ones, they're a little stiff. It seems like the corners might need to be buzzed down just a touch, just a little bit of filing there to fit it. They're a little snug. If you put it in and you hit the mag release, pretty much nothing happens, and you kind of have to pull it out. So keep that in mind. The Geo mags will need a little modification if you stick with the factory lower. I think after a little filing, they would be fine though. So that's it for the lowers. Now on to how it actually performs at the range. So we put several hundred rounds through it. Right in the first sitting, we did some suppressed, we did some unsuppressed, but mostly with the can on there. 45 is really nice to shoot suppressed because it's just innately subsonic almost all the time. You really got to search to find 45 that's supersonic. At the end of the day, if you have 147 grain 9mm suppressed, it's usually going to be quiet because it's a smaller round. It's also subsonic, so there's that. But it is nice that you don't have to go for special ammo for 45. She's just always quiet. So if you're wondering if you should get the 10mm or the 45, me personally, the deciding factor is, are you shooting suppressed or unsuppressed? Because the 10mm suppressed is pretty good, surprisingly, especially for being nowhere near subsonic. But if you want to be a little more quiet and you already reloaded or something, 45 might be the way to go there. But without a can, 10mm for sure. So that's an interesting aspect there. Now, recoil. Recoil was surprising. So it being roller delay just like the 9, the 45 was not very much different. It's kind of crazy to think about that your 9 and 45 are going to be just right there. I mean, you can feel a little more, but especially if you're shooting properly and stuff, it doesn't really affect your performance. I feel like you can rip just as fast. You can transition targets, double tap, triple tap, bill drills, things like that. I feel like the 45 recoil is right there with the 9, where it's just barely noticeable. So that's actually pretty sweet. With that recoil impulse, we tested this against the Stribog SP9A3S, which is the 5-inch roller delay. We also tested it against a pretty much buffer tube only direct blowback AR9. What the? Savages. Glock bag, you gotta have that weird back angle. That's kind of funny, actually. We also tested it against a very, very fancy setup AR9, and you can kind of see the side-by-side of how it looks and how it compares to those other platforms. It ran very reliably. We had 0 failures at all in the first couple hundred rounds, which people talk about break-in periods. This sucker has no break-in period, and it has no oil. It is dry as can be. So keep that in mind, that reliability so far is good. Accuracy is about what you expect from a PCC. We didn't even fully sight it in yet, but it was actually doing really well at 50 yards, about on par with the 9, so it worked good there. It's a little bit heavier than the 9, well, my 9 because I have the shorty, but not too bad. It still is sized properly to be a good little PDW setup, stuff like that. Assuming you can get your brakes to collapse all the way. Pretty cool so far. This is just a little short review. We're gonna have a really deep dive one once we get more rounds downrange, but pretty cool so far. So make sure you stay tuned for this bad boy because we only fired a few hundred rounds. If we're gonna find any problems, we'll find them down the road in further tests, shooting tons of weird different ammo and a lot more rounds and get it dirtier and dirtier. So stay tuned. Hope you enjoyed this video and farewell.